From my office in Burbank, California, my name is Alex, and I was at the cinema for the weekend of May 1st, 2020. Welcome back to the show. Took a few weeks off to upgrade all of my computer equipment, also to gauge how this lockdown is going, and 6 weeks in, so far things are still going pretty terribly, but also things are looking up as well. States are starting to reopen, but I can guarantee you that my state will probably be one of the last, if not the last, to open. And if you ask me, the states that are opening right now, opening a little too soon, but time will tell. Odds are, though, if you're listening to this, you're probably still under some sort of lockdown, stay at home, safer at home, any kind of order such as that. Your theaters probably aren't open right now. And even if they were open, like they will in Georgia, I'm not even sure what they would play, considering a bunch of major studio releases are on hold. I doubt they would want to debut to Georgia only. So your options are probably limited still to the major streaming services or your DVD/Blu-ray/VHS/Laserdisc collection. But I got a few recommendations today for you to check out this week. Hopefully you like them. There is a theme this time. It's all about kids. We're watching movies about kids, starring children, featuring children. Children drive the major actions of the plot. I'm going to go ahead and say these are some pretty great movies. These aren't movies that I dislike, so you probably aren't going to go wrong with any one of them. The first one we're going to talk about today is a Japanese film. It came out in 2018. It's called Shoplifters. Now, this was a recipient of the Palme d'Or. It's the highest prize at the Cannes Film Festival. Very prestigious, very desirable. All of the art house filmmakers of the world want their film to get the Palme d'Or. It basically guarantees your film is going to be seen worldwide, especially if it's a non-American film. So, I remember when this came out, it came out to a bunch of praise. Never really got around to watching it until last night, and let me tell you, the praise is very much deserved. So, Shoplifters. I don't want to go off on a tangent too early. However, this bears some very startling resemblances to last year's Best Picture winner, Parasite, which was a South Korean film. The issues of class and poverty and family being what you make it, essentially, are major also in Shoplifters. Shoplifters is different. It's not a thriller. It's not really a comedy, even though it can be funny at times. It's definitely a drama. As the title suggests, there's some illegal activity going on, but it's never really played super high stakes. Like, there aren't intricate heist sequences in this film. It's just the shoplifters are children. These kids, or this kid starting out, and at the beginning of the film, he just goes and takes stuff from the supermarket, takes stuff from the corner store to support his father figure and his family waiting for him at home. Because they're really poor. They're basically running off of scams, essentially, to make ends meet, even though the mother and father figure do hold jobs. They're not really well-paying jobs, it seems. So they're constantly looking for ways to get a quick buck or lift some stuff from your local retailer. And see, what's really interesting about this movie is the way it completely empathizes with this family, even though every single one of them, you could argue, is involved in some sort of illicit activity. I'm not going to go into super detail about that because I'd rather let you make that decision yourself. But one of the justifications that the father figure in this family makes towards the son, Shota, he says things that are in the store, they don't belong to anybody yet. So if you take it without paying, are you really stealing from anybody? And the answer to that is, of course, you're stealing from the retailer. But that's kind of how he just gets this child on board with shoplifting. And it's really easy to use children to shoplift because, I mean, these kids are small. You would think, oh, they're just looking at the candy. Maybe one of them is going to try to stick a candy bar in their pocket. But for the most part, these kids probably aren't shoplifters, but they are. I wouldn't go into it expecting a super drawn out plot. This is definitely a slice of life kind of movie. It's a movie that makes you root for these characters to continue to live because they're all so nice to each other and nice to others despite stealing from shops. They're just the definition of trying to make ends meet, and it's definitely a situation that you can empathize with. I mean, if you aren't born into money, and if you even aren't born into an average amount of money, you can understand how families can resort to such what you would think of as desperate measures to save money, or to even just get food or basic necessities. There are a lot of people out there in every country who really don't know where their next meal is going to come from. They don't know how they're going to clean themselves. They don't know if they're going to be able to even go to like public school or send their children to public school. I mean, extreme poverty totally it's just everywhere. I personally can't really hate these people for doing what they do because in the grand scheme of things, with everything that's going on, you would just think, well, it's relatively harmless. They have to live, and sure, yeah, there are many ways you can live without breaking the law. However, I'm not the kind of person who would say, if I caught anybody doing this sort of thing, caught a little kid stealing some chips from the store, I mean, I'm not the kind of person who would be like, I'm going to go stop that child. I'm going to go say, hey, you need to learn a lesson, little boy. I wouldn't do that. I'm content to let things happen. It's a very non-confrontational way of being. But that's also kind of how the film plays everything. It's very non-confrontational. There aren't high stakes. There aren't really any super dramatic turns in the film. It's really just, we have to live, so this is the way we live. Like, I'm trying to, recall. I just watched this last night, but I'm trying to recall major advances forward in the film, and they're all very understated. So it takes a long time to develop itself. About the first half hour it takes to really develop itself. And that involves this family doing their thing and then stumbling across this little girl who has been left outside in the cold at her, right out her front door by her own mother. And apparently this is a thing that's been happening. And it's very apparent that the father of this little girl, they don't really care what happens to her. I mean, if they're sticking her outside like that, and this family of shoplifters, they decide to take her to their place for the evening because she's cold for one, and maybe she's hungry. You're extending kindness to this little girl who's going through something that no child really should at any point. They bring her home and they want to bring her back, but here's where that empathy comes back in. When you're rescuing a child from a bad situation, initially you feel like you're doing a good thing, but then comes the point where you realize, well, this isn't my child. I have to give them back, right? Right? Should I give this child back to somebody who leaves them out in the middle of winter with nothing but their PJs on to play on the porch while I can do whatever I want? I don't subscribe to that thought. So they just decide to keep her. They say, well, I mean, if they want her back, they'll come and get her. They'll look for her. And that's not necessarily the central point of conflict in the film. However, it does come back up again. But as time goes on, it's very apparent that these parents, They don't really care. And it's almost like you've abducted a child scot-free. It's probably one of the most heartwarming abductions that I've ever seen or heard about. Taking off from there, it's really just a kind of a ricochet between everybody living their lives. I mean, you have the mother and father figure, you have grandma, and then you have the sister of the mother figure. I'm sorry, I really blank on all their names. And then you have these two children. You have Shota, the boy that was already there, and then you have the new girl. Her name is Yuri, or Lynn. They started calling her Lynn so they could differentiate her, because this child's in the news. She comes up in the news as missing, but by that point, it's long past the point of reconciliation. So it's really just, the movie's just ping-ponging off of all of these people. The sister, she's doing her job, and she's dealing with people at her job. Grandma is trying to secure her own income. And the mother and father, they have their jobs, but they're just trying to scrape money together to survive, and they're going through their own hardships. This isn't really a movie that I guess that you can just paint for somebody point by point. It's definitely kind of a wavy experience where it's like what happens is not so much important as who it's happening to. And it's these really well developed characters that, as I've said before, despite their misdeeds, you really, really want them to be happy. As the film goes on, it becomes a really emotional experience because it really touches on this feeling about family and how it's not just who you're born into that is your family. Automatically, I guess it makes them your family, but in the case of this little girl, Yuri, your family could really mistreat you. They could abandon you. They're not really your family if they would do that to you. Nobody is your family if they will mistreat you. It's not even extended family. It's just finding family. It's finding people to be with you, finding people to take care of you, finding people to listen to you, to want what you want for you. And it's really, really heartwarming to see everybody come together and really realize what they have between them all. Naturally, that situation can't last forever. And there's something really powerful about realizing that people have to move on with their own lives, especially children. Children have to move on with their own lives at some point. You may be their family, you may be their caretaker, but at a certain point they have to start making their own decisions. And that realization that based on these decisions, you may or may not see them as often as you'd like anymore, can be a really hard thing to deal with mentally, especially if you don't feel like you have much else to occupy your time or to make you feel good. You can have a child and you can have a hobby, and the child grows up and moves on as an adult, but you've still always had this hobby to occupy your time. The hobby's probably not going to fill the child-sized hole in your heart. However, you do have something to continue with, to put your time and effort and your love into. In this film, it's apparent that all these people have is each other, really. I mean, even hobbies cost money. Aside from just going outside and creating your own fun, literally creating your own fun out of what is around you, which is a large part of childhood for many people, myself included. For the adults in the room, it's literally all they have is each other. And that's what makes this movie a really emotional experience, as it just goes from beginning to end. It really doesn't pull the rug out from under you. It doesn't pull any punches. It doesn't manipulate you. It's a film, but it's an honest movie. It's an honest story. And I really, really enjoyed it. And that's pretty much as I feel like I can say on that. You can find this on Hulu. It's directed by, I'm going to butcher this name, Hirokazu Koreeda? I'm not sure. But it's a really, really patient drama, family drama. The cinematography is really good. The performances I mean, the performances are what really, really sell all these feelings that I'm talking about. You can call it slow. There's a difference between calling a movie slow and a movie actually being slow. If a film has pacing issues and you really know that it has to get to a certain point at a certain amount of time, but it wants to waste time with boring dialogue or boring unnecessary scenes, that's a slow film. That's a film that is trying to pad its runtime because it just doesn't feel like it has enough to make itself a full feature. However, in Shoplifters, you can call the film slow, but none of those scenes are unnecessary. So it's really just down to, it's just a matter of patience. This is just a very patient film, and despite the title, despite the subject matter conjuring up these images in your head about stealing stuff and it being exciting and tense and everything, there's a little bit of tension in this film, but I mean, it's at its heart, it's a family drama. It's not for children, but it involves children, and it's very powerful. So I recommend you go see it. It's a great film. The next film that I saw, it's also on Hulu. This is a documentary. This came out in 2006, and it's polarizing based on your own personal beliefs. But this is called Jesus Camp. This follows Becky Fisher, I believe is her name. She runs this child evangelical program. We'll get into feelings about religion and teaching your children religion here in a second, but just to set the stage, this lady, Becky, she runs this child evangelical program. Her life's mission is to introduce the Word of God to all of these very impressionable young people. She travels and gives these speeches to kids all around the place. But once a year she runs this, it's called Children on Fire. It's basically just kind of like a Bible camp for kids. It's Jesus Camp. It's out in like North Dakota. All the kids come, their parents might come, or the parents might just send them by themselves. And then, I mean, if you've ever been to Bible camp or even Bible school, I guess you can pretty much guess what it's going to be. But a large part of what this documentary shows is emotional reckoning with this man that you choose to have a connection with, named God. The documentary doesn't really come down on either side of this issue, because this is an issue. Religion, especially religion being taught to children, that is an issue. It's meant to be handled delicately. There are issues of free will. There are issues of religion versus science that I would say are human rights issues, because from my personal stance, if you teach a child a series of unproven facts, demonstrable falsehoods, or just outright misinformation, and you teach them as if it is really the truth, despite whatever evidence to the contrary, and you discourage them from keeping their mind open to other truths outside of what you're teaching them, you can run into a lot of problems, because religion isn't bad per se. But to me, it gets to be bad when it warps the reality of a lot of people. It warps their perception of reality. In this film, in Jesus Camp, you have kids putting their hands to the sky because Becky is beckoning them to, and trying to find a connection with God. And because of what they've been taught by their evangelical parents, all this fire and brimstone kind of stuff, and Satan trying to tempt you into doing bad things, or say bad things, or even think bad things, these kids are crying. They're just crying because something inside of them is telling them that they're finding this connection, and they need this connection because their life literally depends on it. You know, if you've grown up being taught Christianity, it's a lot of it is you shouldn't do certain things or you're going to go to a really, really bad place when you die. And it almost makes your life on this earth right now kind of pointless in comparison, because it's just a run up to your afterlife, essentially. And that can be an issue. That can limit people, because people, when you scare people into believing something, I'm not even really sure that they're believing what you're telling them. They're just scared. They're just because they don't know any better. And these are kids. These kids don't know any better. These kids, you could tell them anything. If you tell a child something false, but you tell them with authority, they will believe you. Most of them will. This is a different film, but if you watch that movie Abducted in Plain Sight, that Netflix documentary, what happened to that girl, that woman, when she was a girl? I mean, that's a textbook example of what I'm saying. And the documentary is not saying all of this is bad. This is just my reaction to it based on my own personal beliefs, because somebody from the other side, somebody from Becky Fisher's side, they would be saying, that they're not doing anything bad to these children because these children are making their own decisions, which I can agree with to a point. I'm just thinking about when I was a child and I was listening to my parents talk to me about things in the world. When they told me something in the world was one way or the other, I believed them because they were my parents and I didn't know any better. And, as I grew up, there were certain things that my own perception of reality clashed with what I was told. And I thought, this isn't necessarily a lie. However, this isn't who I am. And I can't believe in that. So these kids are going to be going through a lot of the same things. I'm sure a lot of them they're all grown up now. I mean, this documentary was like 14 years ago. But I'm sure a lot of them lived the holy life or probably continue to live the holy life. However, I'm sure a lot of them went through some hard realizations growing up, and probably not too long after this film was produced, because a lot of them were like they were teetering on the edge of their own enlightened existences. There's a kid in there, his name's Levi. He's like 9, I think. I don't know. A lot of these kids kind of act older than they are, which is really interesting. But in Levi's case, he develops a knack for public speaking and preaching his own self-thought sermons to his peers and to the adults. While it's impressive, and if he's a preacher out there, all the power to him, but watching it happen to him at that age, I felt like I was just watching him regurgitate these things that he had heard adults tell him over the course of his life. And they made sense. What he was talking about made sense, but I don't know if it ever felt genuine or if it just felt like kind of he was on the assembly line of belief. It's just a really unsettling film at times. It has a really great soundtrack, by the way, which kind of adds to the unsettlingness. Like, I feel like the filmmakers, they had a certain opinion about everything that was going on. I mean, why else would you make this documentary? But they didn't interject. They didn't editorialize. They used a Christian talk show host kind of as a point of reference for what they believe, which this talk show host, he was talking about what's going on to these kids, not specifically. Well, actually, he does have an interview with Becky in the movie, but he's talking about what's going on to these kids, and he doesn't think it's right. He thinks that God gave everybody free will, even though he believes Christianity to be his religion. He believes that God gave everybody free will so that they can make that decision for themselves. And when you're a child, you can't make that decision for yourself. It's just too many factors are manipulating your ignorance. And adults who are telling this stuff to kids, they know that. They can't pretend like they don't know that. They can believe that God is telling them to indoctrinate, that's the word, to indoctrinate these kids with this religion. But they know what they're doing. They know kids are gullible. And why else would you start a child evangelical camp if you didn't think that kids weren't going to be like really easy to convert into this sort of thing? You got to start young to build God's army. I mean, there's a lot of militarized language in the movie coming from these people. God's army, soldiers in God's army, fight and die for God's word or something like that. How is that any different than recruiting child soldiers to your own actual army? They're not fighting with guns and knives, but they are fighting with what I perceive to be misinformation. So this documentary is either really infuriating to you, or really infuriating that you would think that I would think this about what's going on in the film. It's a polarizing film. You can look at it as a horror film, or you can look at it as something really, really encouraging. Or you might be somewhere in between. But I think it's really worth a watch because it's not completely unbiased. It just isn't. But it's one of the most level-headed depictions of this issue. And I really think it's worth a watch. So you can find it on Hulu. Check it out. The last film we're talking about we're back to fiction. It has a lot more in common with Shoplifters. This is another film following children. This is a really, really great film. I'm just going to tell you that right now. It's called The Florida Project. It's on Netflix right now. This is a Sean Baker film. Now, Sean Baker, he is something of an indie darling nowadays. He created this film called Tangerine that came out about 5 years ago. Tangerine's also a great film. I do like The Florida Project a lot more, but Sean Baker's MO is finding humanity in taboo aspects of culture. Even going back further than Tangerine, there's a movie he made called Starlet, which I also watched recently. In Starlet, he's capturing a cross-generational friendship. A very heartwarming cross-generational friendship between an older woman who's alone and a porn star. And it's not a damning portrait of either person. It's just, here's a porn star. She lives her porn life. Here's an old woman. She's alone. And she's kind of bristling at the thought of having friends again. But they're going to become friends. And it's just like a heartwarming film. There's conflict, but there's never judgment in a Sean Baker film. And that's what I really like his movies for. And Tangerine, it's just about these two trans LA prostitutes trying to get their shit together. Trying to, it's been a while since I've seen the film, but there's a lot of like interpersonal conflict in Tangerine, but it's never from the perspective of looking down on the subjects of the film. The prostitutes are very much the protagonists of the film, and they're very entertaining to watch. And here in the Florida Project, it's like a coming-of-age film. We're watching really small children, even younger than Shoplifters. We're watching like 6-year-olds grow up in a motel right outside of Disney World in Florida. Then we're just watching them raise hell around this motel because they're so poor. They have some of them at least have pretty poor parental supervision, and they're just kind of allowed to go out and find things to do. What I was saying earlier about literally creating your own fun out of what is around you, that's what the Florida Project is kind of about. These kids, they go and they harass people for money to buy ice cream or just go play off the side of the road or go play in abandoned buildings and stuff because that's all they got. The main girl, Mooney, her mother, it's just her mother taking care of her, but her mother's like really, really young. She still wants to have a life and have friends and boyfriends and stuff, and she's also trying to make money, and she's doing all these things to try to make money, and it's not really a great environment for a child, but it's all Mooney knows. It's not like you can just hang out in your house all day because your house is a motel room. You know, it's just one room and a bathroom. And these people, they personalize it to look like their own home. It looks like on the inside, it looks like these one-room studio apartments, like basically refrigerators that people live in, but it's a motel. Like, you know, a motel's meant for people passing through, but you know, kind of the majority of residents at this place, they stay month to month. They do their thing to make sure that they're not establishing residency in a technical sense, but for like 29, 30 days out of a 30 or 31 day month, they're living at this motel paying like weekly rent. So right off the bat, it's not really a good environment for a child. And this is another film, just like Shoplifters. It's not necessarily taking you on any structured journey. This is who these people are. We need a series of scenes to develop what they're doing with themselves. And we're going to see if they can find salvation. We're going to see if they can realize what's going on with their lives, what's going wrong with their lives, and how it's affecting others. And we're going to see if they can learn from that. The subjects of Sean Baker movies, you can call them trashy. However, like I said, there's no judgment in his films. The Florida Project is a really funny and heartwarming coming-of-age movie. I mean, if you remove this situation that these kids live in, it's a really, really entertaining film to watch. Like Mooney, the girl who plays Mooney, she's really fantastic. Like she acts like a little 6-year-old girl, but she can also be dramatic at the same time. And her mother too. The character's name is Haley. Her mother, she's really great too at just selling this not super well adjusted person. Like Haley is a really great mother to Mooney in like a social sense. She loves her child, but she's not a great mother in the sense that she's a provider. Like she provides for Mooney. However, she's not providing enough for Mooney's development. No child should grow up in a hotel room, in a motel room. But Mooney doesn't know anything different. And she's just going to go off and have fun. And the scenes that she and her friends are going out and just doing things and talking to each other and getting into trouble, it's just really great to watch it. That's kind of like the masterstroke of this movie, where it really conjures up feelings of old coming-of-age films, where these older coming-of-age films, these children, they're usually coming from decently stable homes, even if they might have been poor. There's stability. There's an actual home there. You might be poor. You might be Kenny from South Park, but you have a home. You have a bedroom. You have some privacy. You have some sense of normalcy. You still go to public school. There's still something of a normal childhood experience in that kind of life. And then you go off and have your adventure, and it's a great movie or whatever. But in the Florida Project, you have all of this great adventure DNA from these other films, but it's set against a backdrop of extreme poverty, extreme economic disparity. And showing it, I mean, it could have happened at any motel across America, but the fact that it was, a motel that is only there because Disney World is just down the road, it's such a fun and damning even kind of indictment of capitalism, if you want to go that far into it. Disneyland, Disney World, it's only there to draw you in and make as much money as possible. We have like a fetishization of small business in America, not for any wrong reasons. Small business is great, but we have this fetishization of small business in America as businesses that give back to the public. They give back to their communities as a way of saying thanks. Thanks for being patrons of my business. I mean, personally, that's how business, I feel, should run. It's only fair. You take these people's money and maybe you make profit at the end of the year, but profit is not to just be stored away for a rainy day so you can, I don't know, influence an election or something. You take that profit and you put it back into your community, because if your community suffers, you suffer as well. However, you bring in a giant, an extremely huge company like Disney, and you plop them in this community. They're completely insulated from suffering. They're drawing in business from all over the world. They only have 2 locations for these kinds of parks. There's Disneyland in California. There's Disney World in Florida. There's probably other Disney places across the world, so I apologize if I'm missing those. But the 2 that I'm aware of that are closest to me, Disneyland, really close to me, Disney World across the country, but still in the country. Disney comes in, they draw people from all over the world. They charge these ridiculous prices to stay there, and it's magical land, it's the best time of your life, whatever. But just down the road, you've got this motel the motel itself could be struggling to make ends meet, and the people inside of it, they have nowhere else to go, and they're living out of it. They're literally living out of this motel. It's such a dichotomy. You've got some of the poorest people in the region right there, just down the road from one of the richest companies in the world, and you don't see that company giving back to that community, that stretch of road right there in Florida that so many millions of people probably over the years have taken to get to Disney World. Obviously, I don't know everything, but the way the film sets itself up, you just get this creeping sense that these people living in these motels, they're there and they're not getting any help from Disney. They're not getting any help from anybody. It really kind of gives you a sense of empathy for them. Even if they do bad things, you know, it's just because they had a shit life up to this point. And having a shit life doesn't justify hurting other people or stealing from other people, but, you know, the human condition is an extremely humbling thing to experience if you experience other people less fortunate than you, and you see the way they have to live. So the Florida Project is really, really all about that, in my eyes. And what Sean Baker, I think, wants you to see, he wants you to see these people who exist on these margins, and he wants you to know that they exist, because this movie is not entirely fiction. And he wants you to see that they're still just people. They're still just children, impressionable children, fun-loving children. And these adults, they're still people capable of redemption. They're capable of education. They're capable of anything. Anybody is capable of anything. And, you know, you see these people, you're not obligated to help them. The same way Disney is not necessarily obligated to help its community. You're not obligated to help them, but you shouldn't dismiss them. You shouldn't ignore them. If you are at all engaged in your own political process, you should vote for those people's best interests, as well as your own. Because the only way everybody stops suffering is if everybody is elevated. That's all I can say about that. The Florida Project is really, really great. I really love this film. It's like a strong 9 out of 10. The more I think about it, the more I do love it. The ending sequence, I've seen a few people not really like it, and it is jarring. The ending sequence is jarring. I don't think it goes against anything in the film, but it's one of those things where it's like, we need this, but we need to film in Disney World, and Disney is Disney, so we got to do a whole Escape from Tomorrow kind of situation where we film it guerrilla style. It's not really that big of a deal. I do wish it were executed a little differently, but the film is just really great, and if you want to experience it, go to Netflix, The Florida Project. It's wonderful. To wrap this up, I have a couple quick thoughts about some other movies that you can catch. First one's also on Netflix. You might have already seen this because it was getting a lot of attention when it came out, but it's called The Platform. It's a Spanish language film. This is a very interesting movie. It's not my favorite, but I really, really enjoyed the concept. It being that you're in this crazy vertical prison. You're on a certain level. You say you're on level 44, and you have a roommate on the other side of the room, but there's a big open square in the middle of your room, so you can see upwards into level 43, but you can also see downwards into level 45. And once a day, a giant platform comes through that open space, and on the top of it, there's a bunch of food. However, the food was untouched when it reached platform 1, so they're going to take whatever they want, and it's going to be the same thing all the way down. So by the time you hit platform 44, it's going to be pretty nasty. You're just going to have to pick up the leftovers, and that's not to say of all the people below you. This is one of those super high-concept sci-fi thrillers that are basically constructed off of a metaphor for how society works, and I'm not really going to go into that. However, I would say that it's kind of obvious at times, like what they're commenting on. I mean, with the construction of this whole thing, it's basically just like a whole general, like, we should only take what we need so that everybody can have what they want, kind of thing. So that's always hovering in the background, and it comes to the foreground at times in the film, but it's entertaining because it's got a really nice tone to it. Like, this is a dark movie, and it's very violent. It gets crazy at points, and I appreciated the points where they decided to kind of put the social commentary in the background and let these characters enact what they feel like they need to do to improve their situation, which pretty much includes fucking shit up. So it's very entertaining. It doesn't really ever get boring. I want to say I wish it were better in some sense, but I'm not even sure what that is. But I'm sure a lot of people, yourself probably included, might have enjoyed it a lot. Maybe you hated it, whatever. But it's a movie kind of like the movie Cube, if you've ever seen Cube. Cube is another similarly good movie with a super high concept. These people are trapped in a cube, and there's an exit on every side of the cube. It leads into a new room, a new cube, and it might be a trap. It might kill you. So that's another great movie if you wanna go check that out. Watch that like a double feature with The Platform. But I would recommend seeing The Platform. It is good, really well made. Well, mostly really well made. Performances are pretty good, and the action's entertaining. It's a good film. The next movie that I'm just gonna give a couple quick thoughts on. This is another classic from the 70s, another classic horror film from the 70s. I've been kind of on a 70s kick lately, but this is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, Tobe Hooper's, what people would call his masterpiece. Very straightforward, kind of a proto-slasher film, kind of follows some of the same beats, but not totally. And this is a movie that to really be enjoyed for its cinematography in kind of a unprofessional way, because this was just a crazy indie movie at the time. The cinematography can be really striking at times, and the production design, I mean, it's really dirty and nasty. And everybody knows like who Leatherface is at this point, but it's really crazy to watch him in his original incarnation and just see how much more fearsome he is compared to the people who would supplant him as like horror icons like Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees or Freddy Krueger. Like those other three, they have their own styles and personality, and they have their limitations. And you could say Jason is probably closest to Leatherface, but Leatherface is terrifying. He's huge and he's fast. Like when you see him running through the woods with his chainsaw, he's so fast. There's just a level of like visceral horror that you don't really find in Halloween or Friday the 13th or even a Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Those movies look studio. I mean, they are studio after a certain point, but those movies look like slick studio projects compared to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's just like, it's such a simple premise. Like these people looking for a little help stumble across this house. Oh, cannibalistic murdering families here. Shit. And they all get murdered. But it's one of those movies that makes you feel like, damn, did I watch something happen for real? It even starts with an opening title crawl. It's like the film you're about to see is a dramatization of what happened to this girl. And it's like, I love movies that start off with these kind of disclaimers where it's like, if you have a faint heart, you should probably leave the theater now. I love movies that set that kind of tone because horror is really, really good when it kind of reaches through the screen and it just kind of bops you on the head a bit. And it says, let me fuck with your perception of reality for a second. Let me make you question whether or not this actually happened or if this could actually happen to you. And it's just super entertaining. It's on Amazon Prime. There's like the remastered 4K restoration of it on Amazon Prime. I think it still is. When I watched it, it was. I think it's a really good kind of back to basics horror film. If that's something you're searching for and somehow you haven't seen the Texas Chainsaw Massacre like I hadn't before that day. But man, it's a great movie. So I recommend it. This whole episode, it's all recommendations. But that's 5 recommendations actually for you, as with every other episode. So I hope you find something to like. Again, I hope everybody's staying safe amidst the quarantine, and I hope you find great entertainment out there to soak up. And just remember that entertainment is essential so that we all don't go crazy. My name is Alex. Once again, thanks for joining me. I will be back soon with more recommendations. Have a blessed week. Be nice to each other out there. See ya.